Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern bar cart.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Welcome to episode 121 of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Modern Bar Cart CEO Eric Kozlik. Thanks for joining us for another glorious interview episode where we snuggle up next to the best and brightest minds in the spirits and cocktail world and whisper sweet nothings into our microphones for your ears only. This time around, I catch up with my friend Mark Viertaler, who is the head distiller over at Tenth Ward Distilling Co in historic Frederick, Maryland. Our conversation revolves around the history and craft of one of the world's most controversial spirits, absinthe. It's green, it's incredibly potent, and it was banned in the United States for the better part of a century. But before we dig into this contentious, verdant tipple, let's take this opportunity for you to make yourself a drink. This episode's featured cocktail is the Absinthe Frappe, or if you want to be French about it, frappé. This classic drink, popular in New Orleans and the southern US, is basically a quick and dirty variation on classic absinthe service. So instead of the fancy absinthe fountain with your slotted absinthe spoon and your sugar cube and your ice water drip, you basically make the absinthe frappe the way a bartender makes a shake and drink. To create this cocktail, you'll need 1 to 2 ounces of absinthe, depending on how strong you like it, 1/2 ounce of simple syrup, and 1 to 2 ounces of soda water. Combine the absinthe and simple syrup in a cocktail shaker with ice, give it a quick shake, and then strain into your cocktail glass over crushed or pebble ice. Top it off with your soda water and enjoy through a fancy straw. There are a few acceptable variations on this drink where other ingredients are thrown in. Some variations call for muddling lemon and or mint into the bottom of the glass before you mix the cocktail, and others even call for additional anisette ingredients like Absinthe or Pernod. In the end, the Absinthe Frappe is a simple, refreshing drink that operates kind of like an old-fashioned, if you think about it. The simple syrup is, of course, your sweetener, and your absinthe plays the role of both the spirit and the bitters, due to the influence of wormwood as a flavoring and bittering agent. So, now that you're equipped with an appropriately classy and refreshing tipple, let's turn our attention back to this fun little romp through absinthe craft and history with Mark Viertaler. Some of the things he and I discuss in this interview include how Mark came to be the head distiller at Tenth Ward Distilling Co and why their innovative approach to distilling made absinthe a really attractive choice as an anchor point in their core collection of products. What it's like to build a flavor profile with herbs and botanicals that go through several phases of different distillation treatments. We cover where this can go wrong and how to know when you finally get something right. Then we jump into the murky history of absinthe, which begins in mainland Europe, makes a splash across the world in the post-phyloxera drinking landscape, and then is forced underground for much of the 20th century. We teach you how to operate an absinthe fountain to louche and dilute your absinthe with or without the traditional sugar cube. We debate the costs and benefits of the absinthe rinse method versus the atomizer approach when building a Sazerac, and we even attempt to put to rest some of the apocryphal stories and malicious smear campaigns that kept absinthe out in the cold until very, very recently. This is a fantastic conversation, and we do have a bunch of fun video to support this episode, which you can find by visiting the show notes page or by checking us out on Instagram or Facebook at Modern Bar Cart. And with that, please enjoy this wide-ranging absinthe-soaked conversation with my friend, Tenth Ward Distilling Company head distiller, Mark Viertaler. Mark, thanks for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So we're going to talk about absinthe today, as evidenced by this beautiful setup here.
Yes.
But why don't we start by having you introduce yourself to our audience and just give us a little brief bio.
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Mark A. Viertaler. I'm the head distiller here at Tenth Ward Distilling Co. Here in Frederick, Maryland. Actually just celebrated my 1 year here.
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you, which is very cool. Prior to that, I was a distiller and director of marketing for Boot Hill Distilling back in Dodge City, Kansas, which was my hometown. Before that, like a lot of other people, I came by the distilling and alcohol profession in a very roundabout way. Actually received my Bachelor of Science in Journalism from the University of Kansas. And when I graduated journalism school, was an investigative reporter for a couple of years. And unfortunately, that was around the time, early to mid 2000s, where a lot of ownership in newspapers decided that they didn't really want to spend the money for investigative reporters. Plus, we spent a lot of money and tended to make advertisers angry. And
there you go.
So I did what a lot of investigative reporters did and left the industry to get into public relations and marketing. My wife and I had gone back to our hometown, Dodge City, from the Kansas City area. And got a job at a national agricultural company as their director of communications, and did that for 7.5 years. And while I was doing that, after I had left journalism, I knew I wanted to keep writing. This was around the time, of course, the cocktail renaissance was starting to take up, that having the advantage of friends and family on the coasts was starting to even trickle into rural western Kansas. And so wanted to keep writing, wanted to keep behind the bar, did some bartending in college, and ended up working at a local theater, Live Theater, developed their bar program, and spent about 8 years working to develop a taste for craft cocktails out on the plains of western Kansas. And started a blog that was originally just a way for me to write about cocktails, ended up getting a lot of attention, ended up doing some freelance cocktail writing nationally and internationally. And around the same time, there were some farmers in Dodge who were getting ready to open up a distillery. And they reached out and they were like, hey, agriculture, booze. Do you want to come on board as like a consultant? Just come in and taste and, yeah, this is good. No, this is bad. And
Sure.
Ended up deciding, I'd been at my job for a while and really wasn't very happy at it. And so I saw an advertisement pop up for that distillery for a part-time distiller and a part-time events manager, and called one of the owners that I knew and said, hey, how about bringing me on full-time as a distiller and your director of marketing? And he said, yep, let's do it. So I walked away from my PR job and learned how to be a distiller and did that for about 2.5 years. And 2.5 years in, the gentleman, John, who was the head distiller here at 10th Ward, was a friend of mine. Reached out, he got a job in Ireland, said, hey, I don't know if you're looking at leaving, but I think you'd love what 10th Ward is doing. I think you'd appreciate Frederick and the Maryland and the DMV scene. And my wife and I looked at each other and were like, well, let's see what happens. And interviewed Monica, our founder, fell in love with 10th Ward, fell in love with what they were doing, fell in love with Frederick, fell in love with the East Coast. And we're here and continuing to grow and establish ourselves here, both in Frederick and 10th Ward. Amen.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of distilleries and distillers have been born out of people frustrated in cubicles.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, as I always tell people, I walked away, I took a pretty big pay cut, but my quality of life and the happiness has skyrocketed.
Yeah, indeed.
Also let me kind of pursue cocktails and bartending as a profession as well, too. So.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's great, man. So we have an absinthe-focused episode here, and we've kind of gone through your journey through distilling and how you've come from Kansas here to Maryland and 10th Ward. And what I'm interested in is kind of the overlap between Absinthe and 10th Ward, because to me, like, one of the cool things about 10th Ward is they're doing stuff that's, a little bit different than a lot of distilleries, right? The slogan is ward off ordinary.
Right.
So I think, mission accomplished. So maybe can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, what the 10th Ward approach to spirits and distilling is, and then maybe we can segue into why absinthe was such a no-brainer for one of the kind of anchor points in your lineup.
Yeah, definitely. Well, as you had mentioned, we say our slogan, our motto, whatever it may be, is ward off ordinary. And it was actually one of the reasons that attracted me to 10th Ward is, as a personal ethos, as a distiller, I always tell people, a bunch of people much more intelligent than me have come before. They're the ones who figured out fermentation. They're the ones who figured out distillation. They're the ones who figured out these very strict and very effective ways to create product. And you, as us as a distiller and as a distillery, it would be a fool to not take into account their expertise. But we can then take that and we can move it a step forward, or maybe if not a step forward, make it a little bit more askew, make it a little bit more interesting. And so kind of the attitude that we take as a distillery is that we take traditional spirit styles and then we add our own unique twist to them. And we are purposeful with how we add those twists. I think one of the big challenges, and you see it maybe a little too often, especially with the massive growth of craft distilleries, is being different just to be different. Just because you're different doesn't mean that it's high quality.
Yeah, just because you have a pirate-themed distillery or an 80s music-themed distillery doesn't necessarily.
Exactly.
It's a stand-in for value.
Exactly. Kind of. The number of people who have a kitschy grab or a well-designed label but have garbage juice in the bottle, that's not going to last that long.
Right.
And so that's kind of the attitude we take, is we kind of take it from a roots standpoint of, we want to know how these spirits were produced, why they were produced this way, dig into how that process has changed over the years, why it's changed. And then we look at it and go, how can we make this our own? How can we, again, adjust it to create something that people recognize as a high quality spirit, but maybe come at it in a way that they've never experienced it before. And whether that's utilizing local flavors or finding and combining different distillation and flavoring techniques, or whether that's, taking kind of even like a fusion culinary attitude towards it of, all right, these have traditionally been these flavors. Can we create something greater than the sum of its parts by finding contrasting flavors within that framework? And so that's kind of what led us into, Absinthe is Absinthe is this absolutely amazing, historical, beautiful, and incredibly misunderstood spirit.
We're going to dig into some of those kind of myths and apocryphal things for sure. But before we do, can you just tell people who are out there listening, like what are the things that were already in production at 10th Ward before you got here, and then some of the things that you've been able to now launch? Because I like what you were talking about just now with the culinary fusion approach and the different distilling techniques. It makes complete sense to me because I know your lineup, but share some of the cool things that you've got.
Yeah, definitely. As of right now, we produce 4 main kind of what we call our core products. One of those being the absinthe, another one being our smoked corn whiskey, where we actually smoke the corn itself, similar to you would, say, a smoked peat scotch. Then that goes in, and so we have these wonderful phenols. We also make what we call our caraway rye, which is a Maryland rye mash. So we pull back on the rye a little bit heavier on barley, so it's a bit softer. But then we actually take caraway seeds and toss them in during the mashing process. And those seeds stay in through the mashing, fermentation, distillation. And then the fourth one, which I was proud to be the one to introduce to the lineup, is our Genever-inspired gin. Kind of a similar attitude to the absinthe. Genever is considered the precursor to modern London dry gin. Very historical, very unique. A lot of people haven't had it, but also just an absolutely wonderful spirit to get people introduced into the styles of gin and the history of it. And, so those are kind of our 4 main lineup, but then we also do 4 seasonal liqueurs that are all focused around seasonal ingredients, utilizing local harvested botanicals. We do a handful of one-offs, again, focusing on that local angle. If local breweries have a beer that they weren't super happy with, or say something went off, we will pretty much always buy it off of them and distill it and see what we can do with it. And it just kind of gives us that flexibility to have a core group of spirits that are unique, but also allows us to continue experimenting and trying new things, and always kind of keeping us a little bit off kilter from just kind of hitting that day-to-day rut.
Right.
When I came in, the smoked corn and the caraway rye are two of the originals from when the distillery was founded back in 2016. The Absinthe Nouvelle was introduced by my predecessor a year ago, and then I introduced the Genever earlier this year. As any distiller will tell you, especially one who's not a distiller owner and kind of will distill at different spaces, you also bring your own attitudes and your own styles. In fact, what we have today poured in the glasses, and I'm really excited for you to see as we start the drip on this, is batch 14 of our absinthe, about 2.5 months of nonstop research and experimental batches on our small 5-gallon still led us to this one. It's still that same base recipe, but our process has changed a little bit, and we have tweaked how we actually produce it to create something that we think is a little bit softer, a little bit more round. And that's not to say that our previous batches of absinthe weren't amazing. We still love those and hold those up but just we're always also trying to find ways to be better and adjust and constantly be improving. I believe it was Booker Noe who once said that, the day I walk into the rick house and I taste a barrel and I say it's a perfect whiskey, it's when I need to get out of the business.
Sure.
It's because, you can be proud of it. It can be a damn good product, but you should always be finding ways that you can adjust it and improve and tweak.
Right. And I think, there's a temptation in the distilling world because you are there with your process, you're there with your materials in a somewhat regularly scheduled pattern, and it's easy, like when you get into that pattern, to get comfortable with it and to focus on things like, how can we make more money on this, or how can we scale this from a 50-gallon batch to a 500-gallon batch? Like, is this and those are good questions to ask, but usually I like to be facing those questions because I've created something that is so popular all of a sudden and unexpectedly, and it's got that popular because of the constant work of like tweaking.
Exactly. And one of the reasons I fell in love with distilling, and as I developed within the industry, I made that decision that I wanted to focus more on the distillation side versus the marketing or even the cocktail side, is because distillation is this beautiful marriage of science and art. And you have to have those processes in place. I mean, you have to have a replicable, repeatable process. And especially things like the absinthe and the Genever, or the liqueurs or the occasional Amaros we do, as soon as you introduce botanicals, you're introducing variability. And I've always said, and one of the reasons that I was honored to take over the absinthe and always wanted to distill absinthe prior to coming here, was it's a way to show off how good of a distiller you are. I mean, it's a total ego flex.
All right, so talk about that. Why is absinthe so? It's kind of like, I'm trying to think of a comparison in like the athletic space or like the tech space or something like that. But yeah, talk about why it's like that.
Well, so I always tell people, in terms of flavor development, and you have experience with this as well with the embitterment bitters, is there is essentially an infinite number of ways that you can approach a flavor profile. And that can be insanely overwhelming. I mean, if you're establishing a new product, with absinthe, you have the advantage of things like you have preset, this has to be in it for it to be absinthe. We talk about what's called the Holy Trinity, which is what makes absinthe absinthe. That's grand wormwood, green anise, and fennel seed. So like those three, if you want to call your absinthe true absinthe, they need to be in there. Okay, we have 3 set ones, but even in those 3 set botanicals, what are our proportions? Do we want it to be softer and rounder with fennel? Do we want it to be sharper and more licorice and black licorice forward with the green anise? Do we want it to be more bitter with the wormwood? Okay, now what other adjacent flavors? So you work on dialing those in, and it's this game of millimeters of just tweak and adjust and tweak and adjust. And then you've established it. Okay, awesome. We have a great product. People love it. It's selling. Now we have to do it again.
Yep, exactly.
And to me, that's why things like absinthe are challenging and frustrating and amazing and fulfilling and why I love being a distiller is because, okay, yeah, it's easy to do some one-off brilliance. It is a lot more difficult to keep coming back in and making sure that that brilliance stays steady every single time.
Right, and then there's also questions, like, so for example, with our lavender bitters, one of the things that I learned, and I learned it the hard way, is that there is a secret number. There's a secret number that these botanical distributors have. They don't list it on any of their materials. They don't list it on their online listing for the product when you put it in the shopping cart and then place the order. But there is essentially like a purity index for organic super grade lavender, and basically literally what somebody does is when they get that lot number in a big old truck or container or whatever it is, they take a standardized amount and then they put it on like a little petri dish and literally count how many flowers are in there relative to how many leaves are in there. They'll do that a couple times and that'll be your number. Well, I was buying the same exact product from the same exact company, but 2 different years, and but they might have been getting them from 2 different farms, or again, something that's completely beyond my control. But now that is a dedicated part of our ingredient sourcing. We're like, all right, I need to have that sort of confidence. So I actually have to call them up before I place an order to say, listen, when I place this order today, what lot number is going to be drawing from? What's the purity reference on that? And it's like, blows your mind.
Oh yeah, it is. It's so granular and fiddly. And you can't, until you are like in the middle of it, you don't really appreciate the amount of attention. And then also being able to utilize those sources, but also there's entirely possible that, you have the same purity level, but maybe you're going to have fewer essential oils in that batch. And so you're constantly tasting. And then you also have to have that knowledge then that you've developed where you go, okay, I can identify what's off about this, and this is how we can fix it.
Right.
And finding, again, that kind of consistency. And with distilleries our size, some of that inconsistency can be somewhat built into the appeal as well. We're single source with 99% of our substrates. Like what we distill with, our grains, our cane, our cider that we use for our brandies, it comes from one source. And you can almost create a sense of terroir with it. It's one of the reasons we do batch numbers, is we will do everything in our power to make it consistent, but there are some things that are just 100% out of our control because we are focused on this kind of hyper-local, single source distillation style.
Yeah, there's a quote that I really like, and I think it's usually attributed to John Stuart Mill, and the quote goes like this. It says, "I would not give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but for the simplicity on the other side of complexity, I would give everything." And I think there's a corollary when it comes to consistency in spirits and batching, because what you'll see is really sophisticated Scotch enthusiasts, Japanese whiskey enthusiasts, bourbon enthusiasts will go out of their way. And what they'll do is they'll find these they will literally crack a distiller's SKU number, their code on the bottle, which the distillers have to put there literally for tracking and recall purposes. But then these enthusiasts will go in there, they'll crack that, and they'll find out how to identify what distinguishes one batch from another. And then they will identify really amazing batches that are perhaps head and shoulders above what the normal batch is. And then all of a sudden you will see a demand for that batch of these, really premium scotches or bourbons or what have you. And so if the really sophisticated people, if the people who really know their spirits are going out of their way to seek out individual batches, why shouldn't we as craft distillers be looking to take advantage of somewhat of that too? And of course, there's the desire for consistency, right? Because if you can't get any sort of consistency, you're garbage. You're bad at your job.
Exactly.
Right?
As I always say, it's a fine balance. With us, it's always been, there's going to be some slight variances from batch to batch, but when you pour that into your glass and you sit there and you take a sip, you're going to be able to go, that's 10th Ward Absinthe. I know that for a fact. Yeah, maybe it's a little bit sweeter this time around because there was a lot more volatile oil within the petite wormwood they used in coloration. Maybe it's a little bit more vegetal because they got a really over-dried batch of lemon balm. But it's still that ability to go, this is the profile that they have developed, and it's easily identifiable as such.
Yeah, it's kind of like a vibration almost. Like you can identify a frequency or a pitch, and even if there's some slight, even if the standard deviation of the notes is a little bit different than it normally is, you've still got that kind of the average, the mean still operates at a really established resonance. And it's weird to compare flavor to sound, but like when you get something on your palate, especially something as complex as an absinthe or a gin, any of these products where there's botanicals at play, I tend to think of it like a chord, and it's not a chord with like 3 notes, it's a chord with like a bazillion.
Right. To me, I've always tried to liken it to the like rocket pops, that have multiple layers of flavor in a single. That's always been my goal, even with our whiskeys and everything, but especially with our heavily aromatized, our botanical-driven spirits. Is I love a spirit that I can come to, and I can take one sip, and it's going to be layers. I'm going to get, there's anise, but wait a minute, what's that falling behind anise? Okay, now we're getting floral. Okay, what's that spiciness? Okay, we've got mace now. Okay, bitterness. All right, bitterness. What do we have in there that's going to be bitter? We have this, and this. Like, to be able to walk through a journey in that spirit, even drinking it neat, I think is the sign of, to me at least, again, coming back to my ethos and the ethos of 10th Ward, is we're going to take you on a journey, and we're going to help you be able to define those, and we're going to work towards having those distinctive layers and have that note of, or maybe like a parfait would be a better comparison, where you are getting each of those flavors individually, but you're also experiencing them all together at the same time, and that forms its own unique flavor profile as well.
Yeah, that is really intriguing. I really love those visual and auditory metaphors for flavor. So we're talking with Mark Viertaler over here at 10th Ward Distilling. We're going to be right back. And the reason why we're going to be right back is because, folks listening out there in audio land, we are recording a good amount of video with this podcast. So we're going to do a quick little scene change. We're going to grab a couple more props, and then we're going to be right back to talk about the history of absinthe.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit right now about the history of absinthe and how to approach absinthe. So what I'm going to start doing now, for those of you who are listening, is we have a traditional absinthe fountain set up with our ice water. We have 2 of our Pontelier goblets set up. Basically, these are goblets that have little reservoirs in the bottom of them. These kind of a little bit more came about towards the end of absinthe's heyday. Traditionally, absinthe would have been enjoyed not with the fountain, not with the specific Pontelier glass, but with a carafe that had been of water that had been frozen and allowed to thaw a little bit, and a wine glass. This kind of came up as you got towards the end of the 19th century, 1800s, again pushing towards the ban in the early 1900s. But what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to turn each of these spigots on the side, and we want a slow, consistent drip coming from them. And while that's happening, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of absinthe, but again, for those of you who are watching the video, this is kind of where the magic of absinthe takes place. Is what you're going to see is you're going to see this clear emerald green spirit start to cloud. And that's called louche, and that is a sign of a true absinthe. So it's also a way to make the consumption of absinthe much more palatable. Absinthe does go into the bottle anywhere between 60 to 75% ABV. So between 120 proof and 150 proof. So general rule of thumb, you never want to drink absinthe straight out of the bottle.
Yeah.
You do want to louche it. So absinthe, again, like we had talked a little bit about earlier, is one of the reasons I love it so much is it has such an amazing history to it. Like a lot of other spirits that were coming about in the 16, 17, 1800s, it was medicinal. Probably the apocryphal story is that there was actually a doctor who they thought he invented it it was Pierre Ordinaire. It was a French doctor. He was in Cuvée, Switzerland.
Okay.
1792 is when they claimed that he invented it. More likely, there's some historic records that show that actually some of the nuns that were there in Cuvée in Switzerland had actually been creating this medicinal spirit that utilized grand wormwood that was anise flavored. Again, like a lot of other kind of history or any other pieces of information of drinking history, there's a lot of conjecture, not a lot of solid fact.
Right.
What is known, though, 1797, the doctor did actually sell his recipe for absinthe to Pernod. For those of you who probably know, Pernod Fils. So Pernod, in the early 1800s, pushing into the middle of the 19th century, they were the number one producer of absinthe. They moved their production facilities to France and quickly ended up taking off as not a medicinal drink, but like a lot of people discovered with things like Benedictine and Amari and
Chartreuse,
Chartreuse, exactly. Okay, there's medicinal benefits, but man, this is really fun to drink recreationally, which is what we want to do with it now.
Yeah.
Similar at the same time is when you saw a massive pest blight on the French grapevines.
I love phylloxera.
Exactly.
I mean, it was a dick move on our part.
Oh, totally.
It was an accident. It was a dick accident. But man, it's so funny when I go back and try to trace the history of my favorite spirits, cocktails, whatever. Somehow it's like the Wikipedia game to get to like Hitler or whatever it is.
Right. How many times can
it's
you...
like how many clicks to get to Hitler, how many clicks to get to phylloxera.
Right.
And it's usually not that many.
No, it was such a major shift for the beverage industry, and that just brings back how much beverages have been tied in with human history. There's a quote that the history of alcohol is the history of humanity. I mean, there are some archaeologists who argue we probably didn't settle to become farmers, to become bread makers. It's because we figured out we could make beer and wine and spirits and brandies. And, so basically this all kind of came to be that, okay, we saw this massive influx, this huge jump in popularity of absinthe. So you saw more and more distilleries within France producing absinthe. So absinthe,
Sugar beet usually?
So usually brandy, actually. Brandy, sugar beet, or on the very rare occasion, grain.
Okay.
Most of what was coming out was whatever was left over that they could distill up to a high enough proof that they felt comfortable that they could then go about the infusion.
Oh, that's right. Because, with winemakers, a lot of it doesn't necessarily have to do with just having grapes. Like a lot of the ethos of a wine house or vineyard is the age of the vines, right? So even,
Exactly.
let's say phylloxera does come and wipe out all the vines. Well, 5 years later, they got grapes again. Mm-hmm. They're just not quite up. So that does make sense that they would still be using grapes for it, but it would be a grape-based distillate.
Right.
Makes
Basically,
sense.
They would look and see whatever they could have easy access to that would be the most affordable. Mm-hmm. The idea would be you came into it with as neutral of a spirit as possible. Similar to the theory behind gin production, you want your base spirit to be the canvas on which you paint the botanicals. Now, that's not to discredit the base spirit as well, because for us, we use a neutral cane. So that naturally has some of those more molasses-like notes in the undertones of it. I believe it's St. George produces, out in California, they produce a brandy-based. And so theirs has a distinctive brandy-like quality to those undertones. So every layer of it is important to the production process, but at the time it was what can we get our hands on, what can we distill, what can we do to make sure we're producing enough.
Right.
And so because you saw this huge uptick, especially heading into the mid-1800s, absinthe became so much more accessible. It became so much more affordable. And because people were drinking fewer bottles of wine because of the challenges faced by a rapidly dying viticulture scene, you saw this shift over into absinthe. In fact, it became so popular that they started referring to 5 p.m. as l'heure verte, the green hour.
The green hour.
5 o'clock, you would get off of work, you would go to the cafe, you would go to Montmartre, and you would join your friends, and you would pour a little bit of absinthe, and you would have your louche, and you would be able to sit and enjoy it. The thing is, much like countless other things in history, because certain people decided they really enjoyed this spirit, in particular the Bohemians in France at the time.
Those French surrealist poets.
Exactly. All these early day hippies deciding that they're taking a vow of poverty and it's all about art and purity. Well, because the French wine growers had a lot of money and were hurting because of the growth of absinthe, and because social conservatives were coming in pushing for just an in general prohibition of alcohol, absinthe quickly became the go-to scapegoat for it. And so what you saw was a very concerted smear campaign come across that basically would say, oh, no, absinthism is different than alcoholism. Absinthe is the devil. I mean, so absinthe includes wormwood. Wormwood is in the Bible. It's bitter. It came up and sprung up in Satan's footsteps, supposedly. So it just all tied in with this story of absinthe isn't just another alcoholic drink. It causes people to commit suicide. It caused Van Gogh to cut off his ear. And what they ended up utilizing as this kind of straw man at the end of the day was a gentleman who ended up killing his wife, his kids, and then tried to kill himself at the end of it after he had had a glass of absinthe. Now, what the lawmakers and the activists failed to mention was that prior to that glass of absinthe, he had around 10 bottles of wine, several pints of beer.
10 bottles of wine.
Yes, and this was about a 2 or 3 day drunk, I believe.
Yeah, okay, it was a bender. Fine.
He was on a bender, and what ended up happening was he had this one glass of absinthe, killed his family, tried to kill himself, but it wasn't everything else that he consumed up to that point. It was the absinthe, that's what did it. So then in 1914, France banned absinthe. And that kind of kicked off then the domino effect of a number of other European countries banning absinthe, and of course, absinthe was banned in the US with the passing of Prohibition.
Yep. And 1914, there were some other things going on in France too.
Yes, just
So it's a nice time to slide in. World War I was a really good excuse to slide in legislation.
That's true.
Because the same reason that Prohibition got passed in the United States was, hey, the war effort. We need these grains going to feed the troops or whatever. I like the kind of allegorical nature of the banning of absinthe because it's a real day parable for us today. We think we're safe, right? And I don't want to be an alarmist. I'm certainly, I try not to be an alarmist in general, but we think we're safe, right? And so did people back before Prohibition, kinda, but then, you just need a few of these things to click together for, one of these regulatory backlashes. And I think, to me, one of the important ingredients is that there was an active social memory of a different time, especially with the wealthy elite who remembered a time when it was all good and there was lots of wine available. Basically just rich haters. And so as long as there are rich haters who remember a time when this was not like it was and they liked it better, even if that wasn't the case, even if they're just imagining that they liked it better, there's a chance that this sort of thing can happen. So, the regulatory conversations can be maybe a little boring or dry or kind of like feel like history class, especially when there's a beautiful glass of absinthe sitting in front of us waiting to be tasted. But I think they're important conversations to have, because if we forget about this shit, it's going to happen again.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is there's so many lessons that can be learned from, especially absinthe has some very telling comparisons to another currently regulated green substance within the United States. It's at risk of becoming political.
Sure.
But there is a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of misinformation out there about absinthe.
Right. Reefer madness.
Yeah, I mean, it was at that level. It was, and it all stemmed from this idea of wormwood. So to talk a little bit about the technical side of absinthe, as we had mentioned, for it to be called absinthe, it has to have the Holy Trinity. And grand wormwood, which is a key component of absinthe, contains a chemical called thujone. And thujone was thought to be the culprit. It was thought to be what caused hallucinations. It was thought to be psychotropic. It was, people claimed that, again, that's what caused Van Gogh to cut off his ear and to go insane. And never mind, he was addicted to opium and depressed.
And probably some stuff in the paint back then, right?
Well, lead. There was lead in the paint. He was syphilitic. I mean, there's all these things, but it all came back to because these people who had issues tended to gravitate to this one specific style of spirit. And this continued through. I mean, technically absinthe has been legal in the US always, but what made it illegal was the level of thujone. So the US government essentially said, even post-prohibition, well, we know thujone's in wormwood, we know wormwood's in absinthe, so we can't have absinthe here because any level of thujone is unsafe. And it was actually by the efforts of some very motivated absinthe aficionados here in the US who basically kind of brought it to the attention of lawmakers. Well, absinthe's technically illegal, it's just this thujone content, so regulate thujone, don't regulate absinthe. And so in 2007 is when we kind of finally went, oh, okay, the US can have real absinthe again. Like, it can be produced here, it can be sold here, but think about that. From Prohibition to 2007, this particular spirit was banned and unable to be accessed in the US because of misinformation. For a while in the 70s, they thought thujone was psychotropic because it has a very similar chemical bond to THC. Like, if you look at them side by side, they're very similar. So clearly, because they're similar, they had to have similar effects. So that's just it, is there's even the argument that people will make in terms of, well, pre-ban absinthe, that was stronger. That would just make you completely trip. But like, actually, if you look at produced or absinthe that was produced by responsible distilleries, you're going to have the same levels of thujone that you have now. You just really have to work pretty hard to get over the parts per million per drink to get above that. Really what happened, though, is because the demand was so high and the demand for cheap was so high, kind of like what you're seeing now, unfortunately, in some of these poorer countries that have resort cities where people are dying from tainted alcohol. That's what was happening, is you started to see, less ethical bartenders start to make their own in-house absinthe utilizing turpentine and embalming fluid and gunpowder. And so, yeah, there was a lot of horrible crap going on historically with absinthe, but there always has been, so long as people can counterfeit that's spirits that are in high demand.
It's kind of a side eddy of the entire regulatory debate.
Right.
So we're going to take another quick break, do another quick reset, and we'll be right back to taste this awesome, milky green, louched, nicely diluted and chilled 10th Ward absinthe. All right, we are back, and now that we've learned sort of about the history, about the kind of approach that 10th Ward takes to absinthe. Why don't you take us through a tasting of this? Let's nose it. Let's give it a taste. And as we do this, let's kind of explain to listeners, what the notes in yours are and what they can, look for out on the market, especially if they're not here in the Mid-Atlantic and they want to go pick up a different bottle of absinthe.
Yeah, definitely. So we've gone through the proper louching of the product now. Some people tell you need to do a specific ratio. Kind of the standard is a 3-to-1, 3 parts water to 1 part absinthe. Some people prefer as high as 5-to-1. I will admit I have a soft spot for a 1-to-1. I like those really volatile oils. I like those kind of heavier notes. This, what we have in front of us right now, is about a 2-to-1. Mm-hmm. Really what you're looking for is you're utilizing that water to bring the proof down, to make it a little bit more palatable. And you're also going to open up the oils that are within that absinthe. Something to be aware of heading into it is those 3 specific ingredients that I mentioned, the Holy Trinity. All 3 of them, but in particular, the green anise and the fennel are high in what's known as anethol. Anethol is what you smell and taste when you smell and taste black licorice.
Right.
So a true absinthe, you are going to have those notes. You're going to get those black licorice notes, but it's not going to be as heavy as, say, like star anise or even something as heavy as like an ouzo or a pastis.
Right.
Those are meant to be much more. What you want in a good absinthe is you want something that you get those black licorice notes, but it's herbal. You want it to be a little bit softer. You want to get layers in it. You want to be able to kind of get a feel that you're not just drinking something that is a wallop of black licorice right in your face. Another thing to make note of is absinthe is not a liqueur. There is no added sugar in this. For it to be absinthe, it cannot have added sugar. So.
And is that different than some of the absinthe replacements that were made in the U.S.?
Correct. So like pastis, for example, or Pernod are actually liqueurs.
So pretty major difference, especially in a moment when we get into the cocktail side of things.
Exactly. The other thing to keep in mind with those is whereas obviously they didn't have wormwood in them so that they would not be confused for absinthe, and that was kind of the sticking point. They also tended to have star anise. It's not unusual to have star anise in absinthe, but in very small quantities, whereas with a lot of the replacements, you saw the star anise bump up, and then also utilizing licorice root as well.
Right.
So.
And licorice root has that strange property where it kind of is a sweetener,
Exactly.
even if it's not in the traditional way we normally think about it. So let's take on the nose here. Let me tell you what I'm getting. You tell me if I'm broken or if I'm a generally functioning sensory being. The first note that comes to mind to me here is green, and this is just like, you say green anise. Is that, for folks listening, how do you distinguish that from like a star anise?
So same name, completely different plants. That's the thing to keep in mind is. If you've gone into the store and you see like those big bulbs that'll sometimes say anise bulbs, those are technically fennel bulbs. Whereas anise is kind of I'm trying to think of the best adjective, kind of a spindly plant that the seeds themselves are then harvested out of and dried for utilization. Star anise, well, they have the same name and have similar flavor properties, completely different plant, completely different genus, and of course, kind of the traditional what you think of those star pods.
Right. Yeah, so that's interesting. I mean, I get, it's the first note is like green. You get definitely a fennel-y quality, and I use fennel seed in a number of our bitters formulations, in usually pretty small amounts. But this kind of reminds me, if you've ever gone to the Indian, Pakistani restaurant, and you on your way out grab that spoon and you grab a little handful of candied fennel seeds. I get candied fennel in this, and then the other, I guess, tangential aroma note that I get is a little bit of lemongrass style fruit loopiness. And I think that is also pretty true to category, especially when loose, right?
Yes. So good nose on that. So that is actually one of the things that we utilize in Our absinthe that makes it unique is we actually do use bergamot, as in the bergamot citrus, not the plant. And to me, bergamot has always had a very distinctive Fruit Loop-like quality to it. And what you'll get, I feel, with ours, as opposed to maybe some of the more traditional styles that you will see out there, is you're going to get that citric note. You're going to get those floral notes. Whereas with more traditional styles, you are going to see more of the heaviness on the fennel side. A little bit of background, so as you're kind of nosing it and tasting it, we do produce our absinthe in the traditional French style, which does mean that we start out with our neutral cane spirit base. We take what we call our digestion herbs. That's grand wormwood, green anise, fennel. We also utilize, I made sure I brought my recipe up so I could remember. We also utilize a little bit of star anise, like we had talked about. And then we actually add chrysanthemum and mace into the digestion. And then all of that goes into our still, and then we bring it up into just below 160. We let that sit for about 13, 14 hours. What you're doing during digestion is, because we are using such volatile oils and such heavy botanicals, by doing digestion, by heating it up, we actually are able to start breaking down and extracting those volatile oils a lot faster. If we were to just let it sit for 2 weeks or so, it would have the same impact, but we start to pull out those chlorophylls. It starts to become too astringent. It starts to have that unpleasant, vegetal, earthy note on it.
For coffee fans out there, this is similar to the bloom. If you've ever done a proper pour over, it's you want to get it started, but not completely initiate the distillation or the pour over, where you're extracting the lion's share of it. Right. It's kind of like it's almost like the digestive corollary would be like, well, digestion actually starts in the mouth, right, where the saliva starts breaking things down, but in a much more gentle way than the freaking acid in your stomach.
Exactly. And so once we've done that, we distill it out. It's distilled in a pot setup. Usually with that, we take about 30% of what we now have, what's called a perfumed spirit. We take that perfumed spirit, we pull the 30% aside, and then we blend in our coloration herbs. And so those are the traditional melissa, also known as lemon balm, hyssop. We do utilize petite wormwood, and then we also do add the bergamot into the actual coloration process.
I love lemon balm.
I know. So that is what gives, if you want to know what gives a true absinthe its deep green, that's the lemon balm. The lemon balm and the petite wormwood are where you're going to get a lot of that green. So what I always tell people, a true absinthe is going to have kind of a deeper emerald to olive to dead leaf color to it. Because a true absinthe, you just utilize the chlorophyll from those coloration herbs in order to extract it. If you've seen an absinthe that's on the counter and it is bright neon green, it's faux absinthe.
There's a lot of ways that you can add color to stuff, and
totally.
The best way is usually with the actual natural ingredients. But it's pretty, it's first of all, there's not a ton of liquor stores out there that just have a huge range of absinthe. So it should be pretty apparent to you when you see that kind of like artificial, like almost like sour apple green.
Yes, exactly. I was going to say, the apple pucker.
Yep,
yeah, like if your bottle of absinthe looks like apple pucker, that is not a good indicator of a high quality absinthe.
Yeah.
But the other reason we do it like that is, as I talked about like way at the beginning, in terms of honoring the history and the people who have figured out, when you do it in this very thoughtful process, when you do it very softly, very delicately, what you end up with is a very nuanced product at the end of it. I've always said distilling has taught me patience. I'm not naturally a very patient person, but things like whiskey, you have to sit and you have to wait, you have to let it mature. The same thing even with absinthe. With absinthe, it takes me 3 full days of distillation, basically from the beginning to distillation to coloration, and then another 2 to 3 weeks where it just sits before we even rack it off and bottle it. We allow that sediment to settle, scoop off the top. But at that same point, because of all of those super volatile chemicals, you have to give them time to marry. If you just immediately go into a bottle, you end up with really aggressive, really biting, really astringent properties. And it's just a matter of letting oxidation take place and letting those chemicals bond and just letting it take that time so that what you have is something that you can go, oh, wow, this is nuanced and complex. And
Right.
just absolutely, in my opinion, beautiful.
Yeah, it is really beautiful. I really love the mace note that comes in on the palate. I think it can be something that's used really well or really poorly. It's a big, pronounced, aggressive flavor with both flavor characteristics, but also some of those chemisthetic properties where it's got like a little bit of the numbing, spicy aspect to it. And when you're already sticking that in a very high proof spirit, you kind of got to make sure that you louche appropriately. But man, is it a pleasure to drink? And you said it's traditionally 3 or 4 to 1, 3 to 5 to 1. I'm enjoying this 2 to 1 just fine.
And that, to me, I think it depends on the botanical bill, and it depends on the quality of the distillation, and it also depends on the style that you prefer. This is a really good introductory absinthe, and that's kind of what we wanted to design. We wanted to create something that, for someone who may not have a lot of experience with absinthe and may have kind of all these misconceptions about it's going to be hallucinogenic or you set it on fire or all these other things, like how do we create something that is going to please both seasoned absinthe drinkers and also people who are new to it and need to find a way to make it much more accessible. Because for me, obviously, I'm biased. It's my absinthe. It's our absinthe. It's Tenth Ward's. It's the one I'm always going to go to. But I do enjoy absinthes that are a lot heavier and a lot more aggressive and have that sharpness of the anise over the fennel. And like we had talked about earlier in terms of balance, those are things you consider as well going into distillation. While fennel and anise and star anise all have that similar black licorice flavor, each one has very different characteristics. Fennel's very soft, very round. To me, every time like a high fennel absinthe or something that utilizes fennel in cooking, it's like my mouth is wrapped in a blanket. Like it's just this kind of lovely, warming. And anise is sharper. It can almost have a metallic note to it. And so you have to be careful with that. You have to find ways to balance those. Star anise is used a lot in Asian cooking, especially in like pho and Vietnamese cooking. And so you have more of an earthy, not quite as sharp, not quite as soft note. And so I would always recommend, most distilleries probably aren't going to give you the proportions, but we're big believers in transparency, so we tell you everything that's in it. Yeah. Just not what proportion we distill at, but experiment with other absinthes and see what you like. There are some really amazing domestic absinthes out there now too, and that's what's encouraged me as someone who's been a longtime absinthe fan, even before I even had designs on becoming a distiller. Even when absinthe was re-legalized, you had access to a lot of garbage.
Right.
And
no, and again, going back to our regulatory conversation, that's what happens. You ban something and then, we realize the ban was a bad idea. And then all that's left is garbage. Right. The first people who rush to get something out are not going to get something out that's useful. Or if they've had it in other secondary markets, they're not going to bring, their A game to the U.S. market, which when we go big, we go big. So the U.S. market just tends to be a primary market for many people.
Right.
Yeah. I think absinthe is experiencing somewhat of a renaissance, and I think we are lucky in that respect. And I do think, nothing against people who mess around with Amaro or liqueurs, but you know what? There's a reason why those are a little bit easier than absinthe, and that reason is sugar. And it's, again, nothing on it because there's specific uses, especially, in my world, in the cocktail world, you're not going to use an absinthe the same way you're going to use an Amaro. So it is, to a certain extent, apples and orange. But when you're talking about aromatized botanical products that require perhaps a pre-maceration, perhaps a complex distillation, perhaps a secondary maceration after distilling, I think absinthe is the more challenging thing for the most part. And so that's why I think it makes sense that absinthe is taking a little bit longer than our Amaro craze, because it's, you know, like the fact that we had to bring in this little apparatus to make it palatable, but it made it more than palatable. It's I want to crush this right now.
It can sneak up on you. It is one of my favorite, if I need low key, I just want to enjoy something at the end of work.
Yep.
Just an absinthe louche is because it's complex. I will admit I'm enough of a hipster. I occasionally smoke a pipe, like a tobacco pipe. And more than anything, I think I got into it because there was theater involved with it. It's a process. You have to properly pack it, and the tobacco choice. And I feel that the absinthe is a similar thing. It's kind of a harken back to a less rushed lifestyle. And it's that idea of, at the end of the day, you're going to take this time that maybe you're not going to make a cocktail. You're going to take something, though, and you're going to be patient with it. And you're going to watch it evolve, and you're going to...
You're literally titrating.
Yes, exactly.
With the turn of this little screw, you're making a little micro adjustments, and that's the same thing that a bartender does. And it reminds me kind of like, you're painting this picture, right, of a simpler time, a time when things are slower. You're picturing some people sitting perhaps on a screened porch in New Orleans, lovely French influence, lots of absinthe flying around, and you have the discussion of, how do you take your absinthe?
Exactly.
And in that respect, it's very similar to like, sugar, tea for your coffee, or sugar or milk for your coffee or your tea. So it's in that conversation. And I think it's a really beautiful option to still have that control, but not have to be concerned about complexity in the same way you are with cocktails.
Exactly. It's a level of complexity minus the steps.
Because the distiller built it in for you.
Right. And you make a good point in terms of sugar, in terms of coffee and tea. You have that exact debate with an absinthe. For those of you who might be watching the video, you'll notice I did our louching without the traditional spoon and the cube, because that's how I prefer to take it.
Right.
I will always, I've always told our staff, if people come in and ask for the recommended way, my suggestion is always without the sugar cube, specifically because, to be a little bit nerdy about, the chemical change that happens in distillation, wormwood is insanely bitter. I mean, aggressively, pungently bitter. I have to be careful when I'm distilling, because if I pour it too fast and I have some dust come up, it nukes my palate for the rest of the day, because it just dominates everything. But when wormwood is macerated and digested and then distilled, it creates this wonderful soft sweetness, this sudden transformation of bitter into sweet. And so to me, I don't need that extra sweet. But as I tell our staff here at the tasting room, and I tell anybody who's curious about absinthe, that is not the wrong way to do it. If you want a sugar cube, you do it.
Right.
Because you can actually get some wonderful undertones. Some of that heavier, more savory notes of the fennel are going to move forward if you add the sugar into it. You're going to get a much more pointed contrast from the mace with the addition of that sugar as well. Sure. So, as I always tell people, the best way for you to drink it is how you want to drink it.
Right. And just to paint a picture for people, there are these things called absinthe spoons, and they're basically, they're maybe a little bit concave, maybe flat in some cases, and you basically just kind of drape it across the top of the absinthe glass. And when you adjust the fountain here to drip, it goes through the sugar cube, and that is the process of what people have called chasing the green fairy, as it goes through the cube and then drips down into the glass, and you get that louching and that beautiful milky color. So there's a whole, I feel like absinthe spoons and this whole contraption is deserves its own episode because of the design implications.
Absinthia,
right?
Just all of the ephemera and memorabilia surrounding absinthe is brilliant. There's so, and again, for a long time, for a couple of years, I was a theater major in college, and I still have a deep love of theater. It's one of the reasons I still love bartending. I still love being a bartender. It's like being on the stage. So things like this, I will totally admit I am a sucker for as well, because it's the theater of it. It's this creating this time and this place and creating this setting, and it incorporates every single one of your senses too. And I think those are the things that I love as well. Is anything that can be a total sensory experience is amazing. But by the same token, you can still enjoy absinthe at your house without purchasing all of the...
You can manually louche. You
Exactly.
can figure out your own way to drip. It's not a big deal. But I don't think a challenge to listeners out there, find me a minimalist absinthe fountain.
Right. Right. There is, you can get the drippers that kind of sit over the top, and those aren't as effective because to me, an ideal drip is 1 drop for every 60 seconds. Mm-hmm. I will tell people, like if you look at the louche on these, it is a lovely milky green. If you hold it up to the light, what you should also notice is an opalescence. Mm-hmm. You should kind of get that oiliness that you see suspended in it. If you louche too fast, if you proof down too fast or with too warm of a water, you end up with a really thin, kind of weak-looking louche. Yep. And so cold water is ideal. Also because cold tends to reduce our aversion to ethanol heat. And even at a 2-to-1, you're still at a higher ABV of a spirit. And so those are just things to keep in mind. And the good news is there's a lot of amazing resources out there now that can help educate people on absinthe. The challenge is there's still a lot of terrible information out there. Yeah,
the internet doesn't go and erase itself when something, when better information comes up. But so for those of you who are listening still, you can head over to the show notes page over at modernbarcart.com/podcast. Check out some of the pictures and some of the video from this podcast episode. Before we jump into lightning rounds, I do want to talk quickly about cocktails. And to that end, I brought a little prop. And this is my atomizer. It is my absinthe atomizer. It's not currently filled with 10th Ward absinthe. It is filled with Mount Defiance absinthe from Middleburg, Virginia.
Also an excellent choice.
It's very, very good. The first local one that I came across. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I like to start the cocktail conversation about absinthe with my little trusty atomizer here is because the Sazerac is the cocktail that we need to talk about. It is seated in that historical phylloxera New Orleans switch from brandy to whiskey conversation that happened because we sent some bad vines over to France. If we had never done that, we might not have had the Sazerac. And there's 2 schools of thought in the Sazerac world as far as I've understood it. And one school is the traditional absinthe rinse of the glass, where if you go and you have a Sazerac, you'll see the bartender pour a small measure of absinthe into the glass and then systematically roll that glass so that the entire inside walls and bottom of the glass are coated, and then they will usually discard the absinthe. It's kind of, I don't know, to me it seems like a waste, but I think there's something to be said in the hospitality gesture in that, we are taking enough care to coat this glass properly that we actually put in too much. We're gonna have to throw this out. It's, to me, that's a hospitality gesture. And then the second school is a little bit more precise. I think it's still looked down upon to atomize your Sazerac because I don't know, there's just less, there's a different type of theater in it, and I think because I don't know, I think it's still looked down upon, but I really enjoy the atomizer approach because what it allows you to do is it allows you to not have to throw out your absinthe, because it does tend to be a somewhat expensive spirit. And what I do when I'm making a Sazerac, let's assume that all the other steps in this process are the same as making an old fashioned, but I will spritz the inside of the vessel before I do anything else. I'll spritz the inside, and then when I'm done, right before the lemon twist, I'll give it a couple spritzes right on top. So that what I've got in my Sazerac is, yes, I've got the same specs as anybody who had rinsed the glass, but then in addition to that, I've got my little aromatic pop right on top, and then I lay the citrus on top of that. So it's this so what that does to me after the first couple sips, it's pretty much irrelevant. But for those first couple sips, for the approach to the cocktail, you're like, whoa! You're kind of like it's almost like the theater.
Yeah.
You know.
I would courteously disagree. I will admit I am of the rolling it in the glass. It breaks my heart to have to toss absinthe down. But to me, for my ideal Sazerac, it's not just kind of the theater and that hospitality of coating the glass, but you're also working on how you're building those aromatic and flavor layers. And so for me, by rolling the glass in that chilled glass and prepping it and seasoning it, we're essentially creating that base layer for the cocktail. And so while using that spritz, definitely brings that and, makes it exceedingly more volatile and really brings it out.
Aerates it.
Yeah. For me, I like that approach of, I've got that citrus from that lemon twist, and I've got all those heavier oils coming right up, and then my first sip, I'm getting the whiskey. And then as I go to it, I start to feel those softer absinthe notes start to push up on the back end.
Yeah.
They're both delicious ways to drink.
They are both delicious.
I would never fault someone one way or the other. For me, it's also kind of like the old-fashioned debate. Do you use simple syrup or do you use a sugar cube? They're identical. It's sugar and water. But I like the sugar cube because it's the theater of it. It's that theater of the muddling and of the
soaking. And it's also like a weird measurement tactic, right? Because you can see it being soaked in the bitters.
And see as it starts to degrade, so you have a good idea of when it's ready. But no, I think, and honestly, I think there's a great place for absinthe and aromatizers. I think thinking in terms of, do you want this on your back end? Do you want this on your approach? It's a great tool. We utilize them here at the cocktail lab as well. We have a couple filled with our house Blanc Vermouth and a couple filled with our absinthe as well.
That's a great place to use the atomizers. And I think the one thing I will say, and not that I have an opinion on this per se, because I haven't sat down and made 4 Sazeracs in this Punnett Square debate to figure out if I like it, but there's also a question of whether you're making the Sazerac in the glass or if you are chilling and mixing in a mixing glass and then straining into a glass that was then filled with absinthe. And then, like you said, you made very sure to specify, a chilled glass.
Yes.
Well, most people don't chill that glass, Mark.
I
just went to a bar and I got a bad
I heard
Sazerac.
you rant and I high-fived. I texted some people and I was like, okay, listen to Eric's episode on this. This is why it's important as bartenders that we pay attention to the process.
Right.
Because people like Eric and I are going to come in and sit at your bar and go,
Yep. Anyway, that was the episode on wash lines. Anyway, if you want to go back and listen to my bad Sazerac story, but so I think it's ripe for somebody to sit down and make 6 or 8 Sazeracs, all made in different ways, and for us all to taste them. So maybe at some point we can do a staff training here at 10th Ward and make 6 to 10 Sazeracs all in different ways, and then
I would love to do that. We're sitting right now staring at a couple of barrels that actually have my rye in it right now, and so I'm so ready for us to have Sazeracs on the menu.
Yes. All right, cool. Pencil me in for when that happens. But so I guess I just want to throw out a few other absinthe cocktails for people who are looking to use this in more of a mixed drink. Obviously, there's the Sazerac that is forever going to be the sweetheart of the absinthe cocktail space. The Corpse Survivor number 2, I want to say.
Number 2 is usually the most popular.
It is my favorite. That also utilizes absinthe. And what I like about the Corpse Survivor number 2 is that you're using absinthe in relief of lemon and orange liqueur. Now, let's talk about the flavor profile of the 10th Ward absinthe. Bergamot, the citrus. And then, you also said that you kind of get some of those citric notes. So going back to the earlier part of our conversation, I think this would be excellent in a Corpse Survivor number 2 because you're already working with some of those notes. And so I feel like your absinthe is a natural fit for that. Have you ever tried it in that?
So so on the menu right now, on our auto menu, we have a Corpse Survivor number 10, 10th Ward, that we utilize actually a lemon oleo in it. So our thought was, because we have that softer, sweeter note of the orange from the bergamot, we're going to ratchet that acidity way up to throw it in sharp relief. And it is probably my favorite cocktail on the menu right now.
Yeah, super refreshing too in the summertime. So there's those. There's the absinthe frap. There are a few different cocktails that are going to call for it. You know what? To be honest, a lot of the absinthe cocktails you're going to be coming across in the digital space are going to be cocktails that bartenders have made, usually bartenders in towns or cities where they have a distillery producing these craft absinthes. And they, the challenge there is like, hey, wow, all right, I got through my Amaro phase. Now I'm on to my absinthe phase. What am I going to do with this? So, we listed some of the big ones. Tiki is also another space where you're going to see absinthe utilized. And I don't want to get into any of those cocktails here because they require a dozen ingredients and are very difficult to
12 different
execute.
syrups and 4 different bitters.
But think about what that does. Think about what absinthe does in a cocktail that is highly funky with rum, sweet with juices and orgeats, and often very citrusy. It provides those herbal notes that can tie some of those really aggressive flavors together. And so in the tiki world, where you're not supposed to know how strong your drink is, where it's supposed to be deceptively smooth for how strong it is, absinthe kind of plays like a sensical role. It makes sense why they would have gravitated toward this product. So for those of you who pick up a bottle of absinthe and might have any questions about what to do with it, you can hit up either Mark on social media or us here at the podcast, and we can certainly walk you through that. But so I guess what I want to say is thank you for letting us drink this, and shall we? My
pleasure. Thank you so much for coming in.
Yes. Shall we lightening it up?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Favorite cocktail?
Sazerac. Honestly, that's what I'm always going to go back to. It's kind of like asking who your favorite kid is, depending on the season. What I'm going to go back to is going to change. It would be between a Sazerac, a Boulevardier, and an Old Fashioned. One, because they're classics, they're spirit forward, they're relatively simple, but they're difficult to make well. Old Fashioned especially is one of my go-to if I want to see how good a bar is. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to order an Old Fashioned, or I'm going to order a Negroni. Okay, these are simple drinks, but very rarely do people get them right. And so being able to knock one of those out, you get an absolutely brilliant idea of how well or how good that bartender is. But yeah, no, Sazerac was one that I think kind of made me fall in love with absinthe. As I moved out of, kind of the college stages of shots and terrible vodkas and what have you. And my brother actually is the one who kind of got me introduced into the cocktail renaissance and taking this time to be thoughtful. And I have a soft spot for New Orleans. I love New Orleans with all of my heart.
You got that pineapple on your arm.
I've got the pineapple on my forearm. My grandparents lived there before I was ever born, but it's just it's such a beautiful city, and it's so historic, and it ties in so many amazing cultures together. And I feel like the Sazerac is kind of the perfect encapsulation of that. And so you have, whether you're making it with rye, whether you're making it with cognac or brandy, it is just so beautiful and so nuanced and so balanced if done correctly.
Right.
That it's just one I keep coming back to.
So you have to gun your head. The gun is loaded, so this is important. You can't go to the Sazerac bar at the Roosevelt. Okay. What bar are you going to in New Orleans to get your Sazerac?
Oh, God.
This was not in the questions I said beforehand.
This wasn't. Oh, man, I'm probably going to Cane and Table.
Yeah?
Yeah. That whole crew there is amazing. I will admit I have not had a Sazerac from Cane and Table, but I did have the best ever Ramos Gin Fizz I've had in my life at Cane and Table. And that gave me, I think that gives me enough confidence to say that is where I would go.
Is that on Charter Street?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I was there earlier this summer. Lion Distilling had a takeover at Cane and Table. So
excellent.
I was there. We had some great food, some great cocktails there.
The whole team there is just absolutely amazing. If not Cane and Table, I'd feel remiss if I didn't mention Tonic.
Bartonique.
Yeah, Bartonique, I think, would probably be up there. It would be between the two of those because, again, just great crews. And every time I've been in Bartonique, it's been like wall-to-wall, crushed, trying to get everyone's attention, but they still just absolutely crush it and manage to get amazing cocktails out consistently.
Yep.
So.
Very good recommendations. If you were a cocktail ingredient, what would you be and why?
Bitters, because a little bit of me goes a long way.
Yeah, I feel it. You have good energy.
Yeah.
Good energy and good, like, sort of you're a dense, long-form person like me.
Yeah.
That's why I was excited to have you on the show. Cocktail with anybody in the world, past or present, who would it be? What would you drink? Where would you go?
So, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and honestly, it's probably not going to be like the typical, like I'm going to sit down with a historic figure. Probably my dad. Mm-hmm. My dad died unexpectedly about 2.5 years ago. Kind of came out of nowhere, and Dad was a huge supporter of me. Always kind of supported me as I passed through, 4 or 5 different careers as I headed to be a distiller, and he was there for my first year, like, ever as a distiller. And Dad was never a big cocktail guy, like, was never big. Like, he was definitely a beer and occasionally wine type of person. Like, as my professional life developed into distillation and cocktails, he threw himself into it, and that was kind of Dad's thing. Always was. For a guy who grew up in a tiny couple thousand person town, the western plains of Kansas, he, traveled a lot and was always willing to go in. And I think, like, what I'm doing now in terms of complexity and kind of being able to dive into spirits I've always wanted to make, I'd like to sit down with him again and kind of get his feedback. And I would love to expose him to things like absinthe and Genever, and like, I feel like he would appreciate that. And as for, where, truthfully right here. I mean, again, like, it was like the stage parent who was always proud of their kid. We would have special events and I'd be bartending and Dad would be there. He's like, I've never had this cocktail, but I'm going to try it. So I think being able to show him Frederick and Maryland and the DMV and as for time, now would be nice because that would mean that he's still around.
Yeah.
But Dad, my dad, I'm very much my father's son. Talking to me is a lot like talking to my dad. And so I think being able to continue to expand his palate and absent of that, my mom thankfully is still around and has been here a couple of times. So at least I've been able to have Mom in for some cocktails.
Yeah. And I mean, just to credit you and the rest of the 10th Ward team for what you've been able to do in this space. Beautiful space.
Thank you.
Which has become much more beautiful with all the work that you put into building the bar, building the cocktail program, the barrel room, and of course the really nice upstairs space where you've been able to host a lot of events. So for folks who are here in the Mid-Atlantic, like, you're missing out big time if you don't come out and scope it out, because it's beautiful. If you have events that you want to do, you've done several weddings up there and all that stuff. So it's been really, really cool to be here and to see all that. And we've done actually some classes that have been really fun here too. So head out to Frederick. There's a lot of great stuff to do and eat and drink here. So that's a fun day trip for sure if you've got somebody who's willing to DD.
They say there are a lot of Frederick has quickly become a hub for craft beverages. We have about 6 distilleries just here in Frederick, about a dozen breweries, 5 or 6 wineries, 2 cideries, and 1 meadery.
Yeah, and I spend a lot of my time up here as a result. It's
become this beautiful hub for craft booze and craft food. It's one of the reasons we came here. We fell in love with the city and the county immediately.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more with that. Getting into advicey stuff now, any books that were particularly influential as you've kind of gone through your journey?
Oh, man. A lot of them. I mean, I feel like
I feel like you're a drunken botanist guy.
Oh yeah, Drunken Botanist is one of my go-tos. Like when I first got into distilling, I will always and forever beat the drum of Liquid Intelligence by Dave Arnold. I've had the pleasure of drinking with Dave. And
Is it how you would expect it to be?
It is. That is not a persona. That is Dave. That is, if you ever listen to Cooking Issues, which is his podcast, which is amazing, listening to that is like hanging out and having a drink with Dave.
Fun story. I called in 2 weeks ago or something and asked a question about a pepper mill. And the first several words out of his mouth were, okay, do you have access to a 3D printer? And I was like, God damn it, Dave.
Yeah, and he is a mad scientist. That will always be his. Okay, well, my favorite one was when someone called in asking for advice on cooking times. And he goes, well, okay, my first question is, did you illegally install gas lines in your apartment like I did so that you have commercial kitchen level BTUs? No? Okay. So we're going to have to pull it back.
Yeah, no, it's, guys, absurd. So we got Drunken Botanist, Liquid Intelligence, any others that are...
Yeah, Drunken Botanist, Liquid Intelligence is great. If you're a huge nerd into distilling and like learning how it has developed, I would recommend the book The Distiller. It was written in the 1800s and was really one of the first treatises on what we would consider modern day distillation.
It's post-coffee still.
Exactly. You're looking at, okay, how can moving away from the farm distilleries to industrial level distilling as you get to that. The Flavor Bible.
Yeah.
I would recommend that over and over and over again. I mean, it's just this absolutely wonderful resource where these two researchers sat down and interviewed a couple hundred chefs and were like, all right, bananas. What goes with bananas? And they list it. And it's this wonderful cross-reference. And to me, it's a good basis of if I'm looking for things to challenge and look for contrasting flavors and complementary flavors as well. Absinthe-wise, again, one of the disadvantages is there is a lot of hot garbage out there, and there's a lot of terrible books about absinthe out there too. A lot of them were written in the 80s, 70s, 80s, a lot of misinformation, completely missed the point.
There was like no culpability back then.
Yeah.
What is someone going to do? Go to the library and dig up the one book on absinthe and then call you out?
You had... I mean, absinthe pretty much was legal in the UK and Spain and a handful of other places. And so...
And we all know that the Spaniards like to sleep in the afternoons. So...
We also know that we go to the UK for, absinthe. That's what you think of when you think of the United Kingdom. But there is a really excellent book that's called Absinthe History in a Bottle. It's by Barnaby Conrad III. It's a little bit older, so it is a bit out of date, but it's super fascinating because he looks at it from a historical and cultural standpoint. I would say probably 3/4 of it is here's how absinthe influenced art, influenced politics, influenced literature and the Bohemian movement. But he does actually, towards the end of the book, have some great information on the history of absinthe and production of absinthe and why it was so controversial and why it got banned. So that's one I'd recommend. Another more modern one is Absinthe, the Exquisite Elixir, which is, I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce her name, Bettina, B-E-T-I-N-A, J. Whittles. That one just came out a couple of years ago.
Oh, good.
So a little bit more modern, kind of glossy in terms of if you want to be nerdy, you want to deep dive, it's not as good. An absolutely amazing reference is the Absinthe Encyclopedia. It is also stupid expensive. It is written like a textbook. It costs like a textbook too. I think the cheapest used one I've been able to find online is $125. But it is very well researched, very well written. Again, there's not much hand-wringing and puffery in it about absinthe if you want a kind of a good idea of that. Those are all ones I've utilized and have a deep appreciation for. An online resource I'd recommend is Wormwood Society. The Wormwood Society started out as a group of people, as a forum in the early days of the internet, basically with the entire idea of how do we get our hands on absinthe. A lot of the people involved with that are also the ones who helped get the laws changed that allow production and importation of actual absinthe.
And that's what you want.
Yeah.
You want those people's perspectives because they'll at least be able to, even if they don't give it to you straight, at least they have the capability to give it to you straight because they've seen the whole 360 degrees of the debate.
Yeah, and they've got a great amount of resources. They've translated some old absinthe distilling manuals from French and uploaded them for free. They can kind of be, at risk of being crude, they can kind of disappear up their own ass in terms of reviews and things like that. Not that I don't trust them. Brian, who's their head reviewer, is an amazing guy and is very honest and forthright, but kind of like how a long time ago I stopped looking at beer review websites because even the best beers were getting 3 stars out of 5. Sometimes you will see that on that site. Like, this is objectively you'll look at something like, I know this is an amazing world-class absinthe, and someone will give it a 2-star review and be like, well, I wasn't impressed because the louche was only...
Yeah.
So take everything on it with a grain of salt, but the management there, like the people who run the website are great. They're super open. They're a great resource. I mean, the number of times I reached out to Brian in terms of like, hey, can I have some perspective on this? I would definitely recommend those guys.
Nice. That's great. Also, this is like a weird little... plug from me. I usually don't jump in on this. If you want to get some of the French surrealist poetry that is associated with this time period and with the vilification of absinthe, the two people you really need to seek out are Baudelaire and Rimbaud. Rimbaud spelled Rimbaud, R-I-M-B-A-U-D. These were two French surrealist poets who were very into drunkenness, revelry, surreal experiences, and they went out of their way to seek these experiences out by drinking a lot of absinthe.
And if I recall correctly, very good friends with Toulouse-Lautrec, and also spending their times on the days of the Moulin Rouge.
Yeah. So it's all part of that kind of... It's
the
not
Belle
quite...
The Belle Époque.
Yeah, it's La Belle Époque, right?
Belle Époque, yes.
And so I was going to say, not very much like Midnight in Paris, like the movie Midnight in Paris. That's romanticizing kind of the 1920s, the expat, like Prohibition era Paris. But if you remember in that movie, what's his face? Owen Wilson.
Luke Wilson. No,
Owen Wilson.
Yeah, Owen Wilson. Oh, hey, wow.
Yeah. Oh, wow. He's having this experience and romanticizing the 20s, and then he goes out with a woman during this flashback scene, and she's romanticizing La Belle Époque. So that's kind of the context for that. Go seek out those poets. Baudelaire's widely translated, and then there's a really great contemporary translation of Rimbaud by John Ashbery, who is a 20th century American poet of note. Mark, last things to do here. I guess let's tell folks how to find you and 10th Ward.
Yeah, definitely. So if you're looking for me, I'm on Instagram at Whiskey Icarus. It's whiskey without an E, mostly because I know that's not the American spelling, but someone had already taken the one with an E.
Bastard.
That's also my Twitter handle as well, although I mostly use Twitter just to scroll and I don't engage too much. 10th Ward, we're at 10th Ward Co. Also on Instagram, also on Facebook. We are super active on both of those social media sites. We have a website, 10thwarddistilling.com. Also a great place to go. That gets updated every single week. We're constantly updating that with new products that we might be coming out with cocktails. You can check out our cocktail lab menu on there. Shoot us emails. I can be reached at mark@tenthwarddistilling.com. You can shoot me a DM on Instagram, or I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. I'm kind of everywhere on social, and I always like talking to people. So same thing with 10th Ward. There's 3 of us that manage those accounts, so there's pretty much always eyes on it. And if you ever have any questions about absinthe or production or anything like that, just let us know. We love being able to talk to people. Like, that's kind of one, besides being weird, we also like being transparent. We love inviting people in. So
cool. Well, keep your eye on 10th Ward Distilling, whether you are around here in the Mid-Atlantic or somewhere else in the country, doing great things in the spirits and cocktail space. And we here at Modern Bar Cart frequently partner with 10th Ward to do a bunch of events. So thanks to 10th Ward for helping us do what we do. And other than that, Mark, thanks for being on the podcast.
Eric, thank you so much for having me on.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's two big things you can do for us here at Modern Bar Cart. One would be to tell your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy listening to us talk about cocktails. And if they don't download podcasts, they can always stream our episodes on their desktop directly from the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. The other thing you can do to help would be to head on over to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars are great, but we're more interested in your feedback. And the beauty is, the more reviews we have, the easier it will be for other folks out there to learn about our show. We're trying to start a cocktail revolution here, and by spreading the word, you're helping us fight the good fight. You can always reach us by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com if you're looking for cocktail or bartending advice, or if you're a pro who would like to pull up a mic and be interviewed for all to hear. Also, definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Modern Bar Cart for cocktail porn, recipes, and entertaining tips. And keep an eye out for new product releases and special offers, which are happening all the time. We love our listeners, and we really enjoy giving you exclusive discounts and sneak peeks at our latest and greatest cocktail projects. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and adventures are just beginning, so remember, folks, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was made possible with editing and production assistance by Samantha Reed, beautiful Absinthe Nouvelle courtesy of 10th Ward Distilling Co, distilling and flavor insights by Mark Viertaler, and a little bit of interview magic by yours truly. This has been a Modern Bar Cart production, copyright 2019.